The first thing he noticed wasn't the shouting. It was the way the woman's hands kept opening and closing at her sides, like she was trying to remind herself they still belonged to her. He was standing near the curb with his son's small fingers wrapped around his own, half focused on the crosswalk light, half focused on the grocery bag cutting into his wrist. He hadn't meant to look. He didn't go looking for trouble anymore. Not since becoming a father. Not since learning what it felt like to have something to lose every minute of the day. But the sound of laughter, too sharp, too careless, pulled his eyes across the street. 3 young men, early 20s, maybe younger. They weren't hitting her. Not yet, but the space around her was shrinking, and he could feel, instantly, how fast the street could turn into something else. He should have just kept walking. That was the first thought. Simple. Automatic. The kind of thought that came from years of learning what trouble costs. What it drags home with you. His son tugged lightly at his hand, impatient in that quiet way kids get when they don't understand why an adult suddenly slows down. The boy's backpack sat crooked on one shoulder. The zipper was half open. The corner of a worksheet stuck out, fluttering in the evening air. "Daddy," the boy said, not whining, just stating it. A reminder. A small voice pulling him back to what mattered. The light across the street was still red. He stared at it longer than he needed to. Across the road, the woman stood near the side of a closed coffee shop. The chairs were stacked inside behind the glass. The sign in the window said "Closed," in bold black letters, like the place had shut itself off from the world and left her out there alone. She had a purse pressed tight against her ribs, both arms locked around it like it was something fragile. 3 guys stood around her. Not close enough to touch. Not yet, but close enough that she couldn't take a clean step in any direction without brushing into one of them. One of them leaned toward her face, smiling like it was a joke between friends. Another one stood behind her shoulder, rocking on his heels, looking bored. The third was the one talking the most. His hands moved a lot. Loose wrists, open palms, like he was explaining something she didn't want to hear. The woman's mouth barely moved. She was answering, but not really. Just giving them enough to keep them from getting angry. That's what it looked like. The man tightened his grip on his son's hand without meaning to. His son didn't complain. He just adjusted his fingers, smaller ones curling around his. The street smelled like damp pavement and fried food. Somewhere nearby, a bus hissed at a stop. A car stereo thumped softly as it rolled past, windows down. Normal noises. And that was the part that made his stomach feel wrong, because nothing about what he was watching should have been happening under normal noises. The woman glanced toward the road, and for half a second her eyes landed on him. Not a stare. Not a plea. Just a quick look, like her mind had scanned him and already decided he wasn't going to help. He felt something cold go through his chest. That look was familiar. Not because he'd been her, because he'd seen it in other people's faces before, years ago, when he still lived in a different kind of world. The kind where people learned early not to expect strangers to save them. He looked away, fast, like he hadn't noticed. Like he was innocent. Like he was just another man waiting for the light. His son shifted beside him, and he forced his shoulders to loosen. He didn't want his kid feeling the tension through his arm. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. The light stayed red. One of the guys laughed. Loud, ugly laughter. The kind that wasn't meant to be shared, only heard. The woman's shoulders flinched. The guy behind her stepped a little closer. Not enough to grab her. Just enough to remind her he could. The man felt his jaw tighten. He tasted something metallic, like he'd bitten his tongue earlier and forgotten. His mind started doing what it always did in moments like this. Counting. Distance. How far they were. How fast he could cross if he had to. Where his son could stand. Whether there was anyone nearby who looked like they'd step in too. There wasn't. People walked past on the far sidewalk, heads down, hands full of shopping bags, eyes forward like the world had an agreement not to see. A couple walked by, holding hands. The woman in the couple glanced over and then immediately looked away, pulling her partner's arm slightly like she didn't want him to notice. The man watched that, and something bitter rose in him. Not anger at them, more like recognition. Because he'd done the same thing before. He'd been that person who saw something wrong and decided it wasn't his responsibility. It was easier to live that way. Safer. Especially when you had a kid. His son looked up at him again. His eyes were wide and calm but curious, like he sensed his father had stopped being present. "What's that lady doing?" the boy asked. The man swallowed. "Nothing," he said quickly. Too quickly. His son kept looking past him anyway. The boy's gaze landed on the group across the street. His small face tightened in confusion. He didn't understand the shape of the situation, but he could feel it. Kids always could. The man felt a pulse of panic at that. Not fear for himself, fear that his son was watching, that his son was learning. He bent slightly and tugged the boy's backpack zipper closed, like that was the important thing. Like fixing a zipper could fix anything. The boy stood still while he did it, obedient, trusting. When the zipper clicked shut, the man straightened again. The street light flicked. Green. His body didn't move. His feet stayed planted, even though his brain told him to cross. To walk away. To take his son home. To heat up dinner. To forget this even happened. But his eyes went back to the woman. One of the guys had stepped closer now, close enough that she had to lean her head back slightly to keep space between their faces. The guy was smiling, but it wasn't friendly. It was deliberate. Like he enjoyed the way she had to move around him. The woman's knuckles were white on her purse strap. The man felt his throat tighten. He knew that posture. That grip. That silent bracing. It was the body preparing itself for something it didn't want to happen. His son tugged his hand. "Daddy, the light." The man's eyes stayed on the woman. He didn't answer. Another laugh. Then the talking guy reached out and tapped the woman's purse, like he was teasing her. She jerked back, and her voice finally rose. Not a scream. Not even loud. Just one sharp word. "Stop." It came out thin, and it made the men laugh harder. The man felt his stomach drop. That was the moment. Not when they surrounded her. Not when they laughed. It was when she said stop and nobody cared. That was when the street changed. He took one step forward, then stopped. Because his son was still attached to him. He looked down at the boy. The kid's eyes were on the woman now, and his mouth was slightly open. The boy looked scared, but he didn't know the word for it yet. The man's chest tightened again. He couldn't bring his kid into this. He couldn't. He told himself that like it was a rule, like it was a wall. But another part of him, older and quieter, said something else. If you walk away now, you'll remember it forever. He turned his head, scanning for anyone else. A man in a suit stood near a bus stop staring at his phone. A teenage girl with headphones walked by, oblivious. A middle-aged woman was locking her car, her keys clinking, moving quickly like she wanted to get inside before anything touched her. Nobody was going to do it. The man felt something heavy settle in his gut. He leaned down to his son. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice steady. He forced calm into it, even though his heart was starting to beat harder. "You see that bench over there?" His son followed his gaze. There was a small metal bench near the corner, under a street lamp. The boy nodded. "I want you to go sit there," the man said, "and you don't move until I come back. Okay?" The boy's eyebrows pulled together. "Why?" The man held his son's face gently between his hands, thumbs resting against the boy's cheeks. He didn't squeeze. He didn't shake, but he held him firmly enough that the boy had to focus. "Because I said so," he answered. Then softer. "Because I need you safe." The boy blinked. He didn't argue. Not really. Kids don't always understand danger, but they understand urgency. They understand when a parent's voice becomes something else. The boy nodded again, small and stiff. "Okay." The man let go. The boy walked quickly to the bench, backpack bouncing against his back. He climbed up and sat with his feet dangling, hands gripping the edge like he was holding on to the world. The man watched him for a second longer than he should have. Then he turned and crossed the street. His legs moved faster than his thoughts could keep up with. Each step felt like it carried a different weight. Not heroism, Not bravery, just a quiet, grim sense of obligation, like picking up something heavy that you didn't ask to carry, but couldn't leave on the ground. Halfway across, he noticed the woman's eyes flick to him again. This time she held the look a fraction longer. Not hope, not gratitude. Something closer to disbelief, as if she couldn't understand why a stranger would come toward her when everyone else was moving away. The men noticed him too. The talking one turned his head and smirked, like he'd just been handed new entertainment. The man kept walking. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He just walked straight into the space they'd created around her, like he belonged there. Like he had every right to stand in that circle. When he reached them, he stopped a few feet away, close enough to be heard, close enough to be a problem. The woman's breathing was shallow. He could hear it even with the traffic. One of the guys looked him up and down. "Yo," he said, "you lost?" The man didn't answer immediately. He looked at the woman first. Her face was pale. Her lips were slightly parted. She looked like she'd been holding her breath for too long. He noticed a bruise-colored mark on her wrist. Not fresh. Not old either. Like something had grabbed her earlier, and she tried to pretend it didn't matter. His stomach tightened. Then he looked at the men. He spoke calmly. "You need to back up." The talking guy laughed. "You her boyfriend or something?" The man's mouth stayed flat. "No." The guy stepped closer, invading his space the way he'd invaded hers. "Then why you talking like that?" The man felt his hands twitch slightly at his sides. He kept them still, because he knew what it looked like when a man's hands start moving. He knew how fast it could go from words to fists, and he didn't want his son seeing police lights tonight. He didn't want his son seeing his father's face in that kind of situation. He took a slow breath. "She said stop," he said. "So stop." For a second, the men just stared at him. Then the one behind the woman snorted, amused. The talking guy tilted his head. "Man, mind your business." The man nodded slightly like he was considering it. Then he looked over his shoulder. His son was still on the bench across the street, sitting very still, watching like he was afraid blinking would change something. The man's chest tightened at the sight. He turned back. His voice dropped lower, quieter. "This is my business now." And he could feel it. The shift. The air changing. The street didn't get louder. It got heavier, like everyone nearby had suddenly started listening, even if they pretended they weren't. The talking guy's smile faded just a little. Not because he was scared, because he was deciding what kind of fight this was going to be. The man stood still. He didn't square up, didn't puff his chest. But he didn't step back either. The woman stayed silent behind him. He could feel her presence, close and trembling. And then the talking guy said something that made the man's blood run colder. He nodded toward the bench. "That's your kid over there." The man didn't answer, but his eyes flicked just once, and he knew immediately he'd made a mistake. The guy smiled again, not amused anymore, just pleased. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's what I thought." The man felt his heartbeat punch harder in his ribs. Because now it wasn't just about the woman. Now it was about his son, and he could feel how quickly these men understood leverage, how quickly they understood fear. The talking guy took a small step closer, voice casual. "So what you want to do, Dad?" The man swallowed. His mouth was dry. He didn't look away. "I want you to walk away," he said. The guy stared at him, then laughed once, sharp, "Nah," and the street, for the first time, felt like it was holding its breath. Chapter 1. Part 2. The laugh didn't echo. It just hung there. Short, hard, close. The man didn't look at his son again. He wanted to. Every instinct told him to check the bench, make sure the boy was still there, still safe, still small and separate from this, but he kept his eyes on the one in front of him. If he looked away now, even for a second, it would change something. The talking one stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders were almost aligned. He smelled like cheap cologne and something sour underneath. "You want to be a hero?" the guy asked quietly. The man felt his pulse in his throat. "No," he said. And that was true. He didn't want this. He didn't want a scene. He didn't want to prove anything. He wanted to take his kid home and wash his hands and sit at the kitchen table and hear about spelling tests. Behind him, he heard the woman shift her weight, the faint scrape of her shoe on concrete. She was trying to edge sideways, trying to use him as space. "Good," one of the other guys noticed. "Where are you going?" he said, sharp now. The man moved half a step without thinking, blocking that angle. Not aggressive, just present. The second guy's jaw tightened. "Yo," he muttered. "He thinks he tough." The third, the quiet one so far, finally spoke. His voice was lower, less animated. "Relax," he said to his friend. But his eyes never left the man. That was the one to watch. The man knew that type. The one who didn't need to talk much. The one who measured first. The talking guy leaned in again. "You got no idea what's going on here," he said. "You just see something and jump in?" The man held his gaze. "I see enough." That earned him another short laugh. Not loud this time. Controlled. The woman's breathing was still uneven behind him. He could feel it in the air between them, like heat rising off pavement. He kept his hands open at his sides. Visible. Slow. He knew better than to clench them. The talking guy's eyes flicked down to his hands anyway, then back up. "You know," the guy said, "you should go sit with your kid." The way he said kid made something tighten inside the man's chest. He didn't answer. A car drove past behind them, bass rattling the windows. For a second, the sound filled the space, gave everyone an excuse not to move. Then it was gone. The quiet one shifted slightly, positioning himself so he had a clear line of sight to the bench across the street. The man saw it. That small adjustment. He felt a thin line of cold slide down his spine. He took one controlled breath. "You're done here," he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. But it carried. The talking guy tilted his head. Or what? There it was. The word hanging between them. The man didn't answer right away. Because he didn't know. He wasn't armed. He wasn't looking for a fight. He wasn't 22 anymore, and he had a child watching from across the street, absorbing every second. Or what? The woman made a sudden move then. A quick, desperate step sideways. One of the guys reached out automatically and grabbed her sleeve. Not hard, just enough. But the man saw her body jolt like she'd been shocked, and something inside him snapped. Not loud, not explosive, just a clean break. He stepped forward and caught the guy's wrist. Firm, not twisting, not striking, just holding. The movement was fast enough that it surprised them. The guy's eyes widened for half a second. "Let her go," the man said. The grip tightened instinctively on both sides. The young man tried to yank his hand back, but the older man didn't release it. Not yet. He leaned in slightly. "You don't touch her." The street shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped. But a few people slowed down. A woman near the bus stop looked up from her phone. A man walking his dog paused at the corner. Awareness spread in small ripples. The talking guy stepped forward immediately. "Yo, let go," he said, voice sharper now. The quiet one's shoulders went rigid. The man felt the pulse in the wrist he was holding. Fast. Young. He released it suddenly. Not pushed. Just let go. The guy stumbled half a step back. For a moment nobody moved. The woman used that gap. She slipped behind the man fully now, positioning herself out of reach. He could feel her close to his back, almost touching. Her voice came out small but steady. "I don't know them." It wasn't loud, but it carried enough. The talking guy's face changed. Not embarrassed. Annoyed. "Man, we were just talking," he said loudly, glancing around now that people were watching. "She's acting crazy." The man didn't respond to that. He didn't argue details. He stepped slightly to the side so he could see both the men and the bench across the street at the same time. His son was still sitting there, still watching, The boy's hands were gripping the edge of the bench so tight his knuckles were pale. The man's throat tightened at that sight. He forced his focus back. The quiet one spoke again. "Why you even care?" he asked. It wasn't mocking. It was curious. That question landed differently. The man hesitated. Because the real answer wasn't something he could say out loud. Because he'd walked away once before in his life. Years ago. Different street. Different person. He told himself it wasn't his problem then, too. And later, when he found out what happened after he left, the weight of that decision had stayed with him. He didn't think about that night often, but it was there now. Close. He met the quiet one's eyes. "She said stop," he repeated. The talking guy scoffed. "Man, you weird." He looked past the man again, directly at the bench, at the boy. The man shifted his body subtly, blocking the line of sight. "You need to move along," he said. The talking guy stepped closer again. Now they were chest to chest. The man felt the difference in age in that moment. The younger man's energy was loose, reckless, like he didn't fully understand consequence yet. "Or what?" the guy repeated softly. The man didn't blink. "You don't want to find out." He didn't raise his voice, didn't posture, but something in his tone changed. Not threat, certainty. The talking guy studied him, really looked at him for the first time, saw the steadiness, the lack of flinch, saw the fact that this wasn't about ego. It made him hesitate. Just a little. Behind them, someone called out, "Everything good over there?" It was the man with the dog. Not shouting, just enough. Attention widened. The quiet one glanced around. He didn't like the shift. The talking guy forced a laugh again, louder now for the crowd. "Yeah, we good," he said. "Dude just having a bad day." He slapped his friend's shoulder like it was all a joke, but the air had changed. Phones were out now, not pointed directly, but ready. The quiet one looked at the woman, then at the man. He weighed something. Then he nudged the talking guy lightly. "Let's go," he muttered. The talking guy hesitated. Pride fighting with practicality. He looked at the man one last time. "You lucky," he said. The man didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't nod. He just stood there, unmoving. After a long second, the talking guy stepped back, then another. The three of them drifted away slowly, not running, not rushing, trying to make it look like it had been their decision all along. But they didn't turn their backs fully until they reached the corner. Only then did the man feel his muscles loosen slightly. The woman behind him exhaled, a shaky sound. He didn't turn around immediately. He kept watching the men until they were out of sight. Only then did he look back at her. Up close, she looked younger than he'd thought. Mid-20s, maybe. Eyes red around the edges. "You okay?" he asked. It came out rougher than he meant. She nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you." Her voice trembled on the last word. He glanced across the street again. His son was already sliding off the bench, ready to run to him. The man lifted a hand slightly. "Wait." The boy froze. The woman followed his gaze. "That's your son?" she asked softly. He nodded. She swallowed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For this." He shook his head once. "It's not on you." A police siren wailed faintly in the distance. Not close, but moving. The woman looked nervous again. "I should go," she said. He nodded. "Go somewhere with people," he said. "Call someone." "I will." She hesitated like she wanted to say more. Then she walked quickly down the block, not looking back. The man stood there for a second longer, breathing, feeling the tremor in his hands now that it was over. Then he crossed back to his son. The boy ran the last few steps and grabbed him around the waist. Hard. The man crouched down immediately, wrapping his arms around the small body. He could feel the boy's heart racing. "Are you okay?" the boy whispered. The man closed his eyes briefly. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." The boy pulled back slightly. "Were they bad guys?" The man paused. He looked over his son's head at the empty corner where the men had disappeared. Then back at his child. They were making a bad choice, he said carefully. The boy thought about that. Did you make them stop? The man swallowed. I hope so. He stood lifting his son's backpack strap higher on his shoulder. They started walking home. The street sounded normal again. Cars, distant laughter. A door slamming somewhere, but the man could still feel it. That thin edge. That awareness. He didn't know yet that this wasn't finished. He only knew that something had shifted, and as they turned the corner, he felt eyes on his back. Even though he didn't look back. He wanted to. The feeling sat between his shoulder blades, steady and irritating, like a finger pressing lightly but not enough to bruise. But he kept walking. His son's hand was in his again. Smaller, warmer than it should have been. The boy was still a little tense, stepped slightly quicker than usual. Are they coming? The boy asked quietly. The man shook his head. No. He didn't know that for certain. They turned another corner. Their apartment building was 3 blocks away, not far. Close enough that he usually let his mind drift on this stretch of sidewalk. Tonight it stayed sharp. Windows, reflections, parked cars. He noticed everything. A group of teenagers laughed near a laundromat. A delivery truck idled at the curb. A couple argued softly outside a pharmacy. Normal. Too normal. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. He ignored it. The grocery bag was still cutting into his wrist. He adjusted his grip. He could feel the adrenaline draining now, leaving behind a thin layer of exhaustion. His legs felt slightly hollow. He hated that feeling. The delayed shake. His son glanced up at him. You were mad, the boy said. The man looked down. Was I? The boy nodded. Your face did that thing. What thing? Like this. The boy scrunched his eyebrows and tightened his mouth. The man almost smiled. Almost. Sometimes grown-ups get serious, he said. We scared? The question landed differently. He didn't answer right away. He thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. The boy seemed surprised. Really? Yeah. Why? The man slowed his step slightly. Because when people don't listen, he said, choosing each word, things can change fast. The boy processed that. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded like he did. They reached their building. Old brick. Faded paint around the doorframe. The intercom buzzed faintly even when no one was pressing it. He unlocked the door and ushered his son inside quickly. Only after it closed did he feel his shoulders drop a fraction. The hallway smelled like detergent and something fried from another apartment. Safe. For now. They climbed the stairs together. 3rd floor. The boy ran the last few steps and waited outside their door while the man dug for his keys. His hands weren't shaking anymore. That part had passed. He unlocked the door and let the boy go in first. Backpacks dropped. Shoes kicked off. The small apartment felt warm. Familiar. He set the groceries on the counter and leaned both hands against it for a second. Just breathing. The boy was already at the table, pulling out his worksheet. Can I have juice? He asked. Yeah. The man poured it slowly, watching the liquid rise in the cup. He focused on that small, controlled movement. He needed normal. He carried the cup over and set it down. Daddy? The boy hesitated. Was that lady scared? The man paused. He pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Yes, he said. Did she know you? No. Then why did you help her? The man looked at his son for a long moment. Because I didn't last time. The words stayed in his throat. Instead he said, because sometimes people need someone to stand next to them. The boy nodded slowly, absorbing it. Then he went back to his worksheet. Children move on faster than adults. They have to. The man stood and began putting groceries away. He tried to let the rhythm carry him. Cabinets opening, plastic rustling, refrigerator humming. His phone buzzed again. This time he pulled it out. 3 missed calls. Unknown number. His stomach tightened. He stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then it buzzed again in his hand. Same number. He answered. Hello? There was a brief pause. Then a familiar voice. You walk fast. The man's chest went cold. He didn't speak. The voice chuckled softly. Relax. Just talking. It was the talking one. He would recognize that tone anywhere now. How'd you get this number? The man asked quietly. Don't worry about it. The man's eyes flicked to his son at the table. The boy was humming softly to himself, pencil moving across paper. You need to stop, the man said. Stop what? This. A short laugh. You embarrassed my friend. The man stayed silent. Made him look stupid in front of people, the voice continued. You know how that feels? The man's jaw tightened. I don't care about that, he said. Well, we do. There was movement on the other end. Street noise. Wind. You got a kid, the voice said casually. Cute kid. The man's heart thudded hard enough he could hear it. He turned away slightly from the table. You come near him, he said, voice low and controlled, and this becomes something else. There was a pause, then a small, amused exhale. See, that's what I'm saying. You like this. The man didn't respond. We just want to talk, the voice added. No, you don't even know what we want. I don't care. Another pause. Longer this time, the playful tone thinned slightly. You think you're better than us? The man closed his eyes briefly. This isn't about better, he said. Feels like it. The line went quiet. Then, you at home right now? The man didn't answer. The voice laughed again. Yeah, thought so. The call ended. The man stared at the screen. His hand felt colder than before. Across the room, his son looked up. Who was that? Wrong number, the man said quickly. The boy nodded and went back to his paper. The man stood still for several seconds. Then he walked to the window. Slowly. He didn't yank the curtain aside. He moved it just enough to see down to the street. Nothing unusual. Cars barked. A couple walking by. A man smoking near the corner. No one staring up. Still the feeling remained. They knew where he lived. Or at least, they wanted him to believe they did. He stepped back from the window. His chest felt tight again. He looked at his son. The boy was coloring something now. Completely unaware of the weight that had just entered the room, the man moved toward the door and checked the lock. Then the chain. Then he checked them again. He hated this. Not the fear for himself. The vulnerability. He had inserted himself into something, and now it had followed him home. He walked back to the table and sat down slowly. His son looked up. Are we okay? The boy asked. The question was simple. Too simple. The man forced his face to soften. Yeah, he said. He reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. We're okay. But he could feel the truth shifting underneath that answer. And for the first time that night, he wondered if stepping in had put his son in a different kind of danger. Not loud, not visible, but real. Outside, somewhere down the block, a car door slammed. The sound made him flinch before he could stop himself. His son noticed. You said we're okay, the boy said. The man met his eyes. I know. And he held that look a little longer than necessary, as if memorizing it. That night, after his son fell asleep, the apartment felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't calm you down. It makes you listen harder. He sat on the edge of the couch with the lamp on low, one elbow resting on his knee. The television was off. He didn't want noise. Noise made it easier to miss something. Every few minutes he found himself looking toward the window again. Not because he saw anything. Because he didn't. He kept thinking about the call, the casual way the guy had said, cute kid, like he was commenting on a dog, like it was harmless, like it wasn't meant to land like a blade. The man rubbed his face with both hands. He was tired, deep tired, the kind that comes from living on responsibility for too long. He could still see the woman's wrist. That bruise. He wondered if it had been from them, or from someone else. Either way, she'd carried it quietly, the way people did when they stopped expecting anyone to ask. He thought about the moment he grabbed the guy's wrist, The way the kid's eyes had widened, that was the part he didn't like. The surprise. The fact that they hadn't expected him to do anything. He got up and walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water. He drank half of it without tasting it. Then he checked his phone. No new calls. No messages. He stared at the unknown number again, thumb hovering over it. He could block it, but blocking didn't matter. People like that didn't need one number. They just needed a reason. He set the phone down. He told himself to sleep. He didn't. Around 2 in the morning, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment. Slow, unhurried. Someone stopping briefly near his door. His body stiffened instantly. He stood without thinking and moved closer to the door, silent. Bare feet on cold floor. His breath held. The footsteps paused, then continued. A door further down the hall opened. Someone coughed. A toilet flushed. Normal. His heart didn't slow down right away. He leaned his forehead against the wall beside the door, eyes closed. He hated that he was reacting like this. He hadn't felt this kind of alertness in years. It reminded him of another life, a life he didn't talk about anymore. He went back to the couch and sat down again. His water sat untouched on the counter. He stayed there until the sky outside the window began to lighten. When his son woke up, the man was already dressed. The boy walked out rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in the back. "You're up early," the boy said. The man nodded. "Couldn't sleep." The boy yawned and climbed onto a chair at the table. "What's for breakfast?" "Eggs." The man cracked them into a bowl. His hands were steady. They always were when he needed them to be. His son watched him. "Are we going to school?" "Yes." The boy blinked slowly. "You look tired." "I am." The boy swung his legs under the chair. After a moment he said, "Are those guys still mad?" The man paused with the fork mid-stir. He looked at his son. The boy's eyes were serious now, awake, focused. Kids remember more than people think. "I don't know," the man said honestly. The boy frowned. "But you said they left." "They did," the man replied. "But sometimes people don't like being told no." The boy stared down at his hands. Then he asked quietly, "Did you do something bad?" The question hit harder than it should have. The man set the bowl down and crouched, so he was level with his son. "No," he said firmly. "I didn't do anything bad." The boy's face stayed tight. "Then why do you look like that?" The man didn't answer immediately. "Because being right doesn't keep you safe." He reached up and smoothed the boy's hair down. "Sometimes," he said, "even when you do the right thing, it still makes problems." The boy looked like he didn't like that answer. The man didn't like it either. After breakfast, he walked his son to school. He took a different route than usual. Longer, more people, more traffic. He stayed near busy intersections. He kept his son on the inside of the sidewalk, away from the street. The boy noticed. "You're holding my hand tight," he said. The man loosened his grip slightly. "Sorry." When they got near the school gates, he saw a police car parked across the street. Not responding to anything, just sitting there, engine running. It should have reassured him. It didn't. He kissed his son on the top of the head. "Be good," he said. "I always am," the boy replied, like it was obvious. The man watched him run inside. Then he stood there for a moment longer than other parents did, watching the doors, watching the street. When he finally turned to leave, he saw them. Across the road near the corner store, 2 of the 3 young men, the talking one and the quiet one. They weren't doing anything obvious. They were leaning against the wall, pretending to scroll on their phones, but their eyes weren't on their screens. They were on him. The man stopped walking. He felt his body go still in a way that didn't look natural. The talking one smiled and lifted his chin slightly in greeting, like they were neighbors, like nothing had happened. The quiet one just stared. The man didn't move. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge. He turned and walked away, forcing his pace to stay normal. His stomach was tight. They'd followed him here. They'd watched him bring his kid to school. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. He walked 2 blocks before he let himself glance back. They were gone. He kept walking anyway. He didn't go home. Not right away. He went to a small cafe near the busier part of town. He sat by the window with a coffee he didn't drink. His hands were clasped on the table. He tried to think clearly. If he called the police, what would he say? 3 guys were mean on the street. They made a woman uncomfortable. They called him. They stood near his kid's school. None of it was enough. Not on paper. And the truth was, he didn't want police involved. Not because he was guilty, because he didn't trust how it would unfold. He didn't trust how stories changed once uniforms entered the room. He'd seen that too. He sat there for almost an hour, watching the street outside like he was waiting for something to happen. Eventually his phone buzzed again. Same number. He stared at it, his thumb hovered. Then he answered. "Yeah?" The voice sounded pleased. "Good morning, Dad." The man's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "Just wanted to see if you were still brave in daylight." The man didn't respond. The voice continued, softer now. "You embarrassed us yesterday. People were watching. You made it a thing." "You made it a thing," the man said. The guy laughed. "Nah, she made it a thing. You made it worse." The man's jaw tightened. "Don't call me again." "Or what?" the guy echoed, mocking. The man's eyes fixed on the coffee cup. He could feel heat building under his skin now. Controlled, but real. "I'm done talking," he said. The voice dropped. "Listen," the guy said. "We can do this easy, or we can do it hard." The man's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" "It means you owe my friend an apology." Silence. The man actually thought he'd misheard. "An apology," the voice repeated. "You come down tonight. You say sorry. You show respect. Then it's over." The man leaned back slightly in the chair. His heartbeat was steady, but heavier. "And if I don't?" The voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "Then maybe your kid sees you get hurt." The man's throat tightened. His fingers went numb. "You touch him," he said, "and I will kill you." The words came out flat. No shouting, no performance, just a statement. There was a pause on the line. Then the guy laughed. But it wasn't amused anymore. It was cautious. "Ooh, okay, there he is." The man didn't blink. The voice continued. "Tonight, 10, behind the corner store. You know the one." The man's chest felt tight. He didn't answer. The guy sighed. "You don't come," he said. "Then we come to you. And you won't like how we do it." The call ended again. The man stared at the phone in his hand. His reflection in the cafe window looked unfamiliar. Pale. Eyes too sharp. He sat there for a long time, not moving. He knew what they were doing. They weren't trying to win a fight. They were trying to humiliate him. To pull him into their world. Their rules. To make him choose between pride and safety. But it wasn't pride, that was the problem. He didn't care about pride. He cared about his son. He cared about the fact that 3 young men now felt entitled to decide what his child's life looked like. He finished his coffee without tasting it. Then he stood up. He walked out into the street, the cold air hitting his face like a slap. As he walked home, he realized something that made his stomach drop. They hadn't asked him to meet alone because they wanted an apology. They wanted him out of his apartment, out of reach of his door lock, out of reach of safety. And if he went, he might not come back. But if he didn't go, he pictured his son walking out of school, the boy's small body among other children, a hand reaching, a van door sliding open. The thought made his legs feel weak. He stopped on the sidewalk and pressed his palm against a brick wall, breathing through his nose. His body didn't shake, but his vision narrowed. He knew he had to make a choice, and he knew neither option was clean. He didn't go home right away. He walked. Not toward anywhere specific, just moving, letting the cold air keep him alert, letting his thoughts settle into something he could actually hold. 10 o'clock, behind the corner store. He knew the spot. There was an alley there, narrow, brick on both sides. One broken light above a metal door that never seemed to open. Trash bins that overflowed by Thursday. It wasn't a place people stumbled into by accident. He stopped at a crosswalk and watched traffic pass. If he went, he would be stepping into their terms, their ground, their timing. If he didn't go, he would be waiting, watching windows, checking locks every 10 minutes, wondering if every car that slowed down was about to stop. Neither felt like control. He thought about calling someone. There wasn't anyone to call. He'd built his life small on purpose. Quiet job. Small circle. No history leaking into the present. He kept it clean for his son. He closed his eyes briefly. There was another option. Not the police, not yet. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts he rarely touched. Old names. Numbers from another time. Most of them inactive. Some he hoped were. He stopped on one. He hadn't called it in 6 years. His thumb hovered. He almost put the phone away. Then he pressed it. It rang twice. A voice answered. Older, slower. Yeah. The man swallowed. It's me. Silence on the line. Then a small exhale. Didn't think I'd hear that voice again. I know. What's wrong? The man leaned against a storefront window, eyes on the street. I need information, he said. A pause. About 3 kids, early 20s, one loud, one quiet, one just follows. The voice on the other end didn't ask why. Names? I don't know. Location? He gave it. Another pause. You in trouble? The man thought about that. Yes. A longer silence. Then the voice said, I'll call you back. The line went dead. He stared at the screen. His reflection looked thinner than he remembered. He put the phone away and walked home. When he stepped inside the apartment, the quiet felt different than earlier. Not just tense. Waiting. He checked the locks again. Then he sat at the table and stared at nothing. He didn't want his son coming home to see him like this. So when it was time to pick him up, he washed his face, changed his shirt, smoothed his expression into something steady. At the school gate, he saw the boy before the boy saw him. The kid was laughing at something another child had said. Carefree, head thrown back. The man felt something tight and his chest loosened for a second. Then his son spotted him and ran over. Hi. Hey. The boy grabbed his hand automatically. Can we go to the park? The man hesitated. He scanned the street. No familiar faces. No one lingering. Not today, he said gently. Why? I've got something to do tonight. The boy studied him. Is it about those guys? The man didn't lie. Yes. The boy's face changed. I don't like them. I know. Are you going to fight? The question sat heavy. I'm going to talk. The boy didn't look convinced. They walked home slower than usual. Halfway there, the man's phone buzzed. He stopped walking. The boy looked up. Who is it? The man checked the screen. The old contact. He answered. Yeah, they're small, the voice said immediately. Local kids. One of them's got a brother who thinks he's important, but he's not. They hang around that store most nights. The man listened carefully. They got anything behind them? He asked. No, just noise. He exhaled slowly. Okay. A pause. You going back into something? The voice asked. No. You sure? Yes. Another pause. You need backup. The word hung there. Backup. The word hung there. Backup. He imagined another man standing in that alley, turning it into something bigger. No, he said finally. This is mine. Don't do anything stupid. The man almost smiled. I won't. The call ended. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. His son was watching him. What did they say? The boy asked. None important. The boy frowned. You always say that when it is. The man didn't answer. That evening, he cooked dinner slowly, paid attention to every small movement, the sound of oil in the pan, the scrape of a knife against the cutting board. His son talked about school. A spelling test. A kid who cried during recess. A teacher who wore bright shoes. The man nodded at the right times. He memorized the boy's voice. At 8:30, he told his son to start getting ready for bed. Are you leaving? The boy asked. Yes. The boy stood still for a second. I don't want you to. The man crouched down in front of him. I know. Can I come? No. The boy's lip trembled, but he held it together. Will you come back? The question was quiet. The man looked at him for a long time. Yes, he said. He didn't let hesitation show. He tucked the boy into bed and sat beside him until his breathing slowed. When he stood to leave the room, his son's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Daddy? Yeah. Don't be mad when you talk. The man swallowed. I won't. He gently removed the small hand and stepped out. He stood in the hallway for a full minute before moving. At 9:45, he left the apartment. He didn't slam the door. He locked it softly. The street was colder now. Quieter. He walked toward the corner store with steady steps. He didn't rush. He didn't drag it out. As he turned the corner, he saw them, all three, waiting near the alley entrance. The talking one leaned against the wall like he owned it. The quiet one stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. The third paced slightly, restless. They looked up as he approached. The talking one grinned. Look at that, he said. Dad showed up. The man stopped a few feet away. You said you wanted to talk. The quiet one nodded toward the alley. Back there. The man didn't move. We can talk here. The talking one's smile thinned. Don't be scared. The man held his gaze. I'm not. A tense silence stretched between them. Cars passed at the end of the block. Not many. The quiet one stepped forward slightly. We just want respect, he said. The man didn't blink. You don't get respect by threatening kids. The third one scoffed. You started this. The man felt the old steadiness settle into his bones. I finished it, he said. The talking one pushed off the wall. You think you better than us? No. Then why you act like it? The man didn't answer. Because the truth wasn't something they would hear. The talking one stepped closer. Say it, he demanded. Say what? Say you were wrong. The man felt the weight of the moment. Not pride, not ego, just the line he wouldn't cross. I wasn't, he said. The quiet one's jaw tightened. The third one shifted like he was about to move. The talking one stepped right into his space. You think we won't do it? He asked softly. Do what? Make you regret it. The man held his ground. I already regret something, he said quietly. They frowned, confused, and for a split second he saw it. They didn't understand him. They thought this was about image, territory, dominance. They didn't understand that he was standing here because of something older, something heavier. The talking one's expression hardened. Wrong answer, he muttered. And then he shoved him. Hard. The man staggered back one step. Didn't fall. Didn't swing. Just reset his feet. The quiet one moved closer. The alley behind them looked darker now. Narrower. The man could feel the situation tipping. Not loud yet, but close. He thought of his son asleep in bed. He thought of the woman on the sidewalk. He thought of the bruise on her wrist, and he made a decision. He stepped forward instead of back, not striking, not rushing, just invading their space the way they had invaded hers. It caught them off guard. The talking one blinked. You don't want this, the man said quietly. The third one lunged first, and that was when the street started to change again. The third one moved fast, like he'd been waiting for permission. His shoulder dipped and his fist came up wild, aimed more at the man's face than anywhere specific. No technique, just anger. The man saw it early. He stepped slightly to the side and caught the kid's wrist with one hand the way you'd catch a door before it slammed. He didn't yank. He didn't twist. He just redirected it. The kid stumbled forward off balance. The man used his other hand to push the kid's shoulder down and away. Enough to break momentum. Enough to make him miss. The kid nearly hit the wall. "Hey!" the talking one barked. The quiet one's eyes narrowed. The man's breathing stayed controlled. He could feel his heartbeat, but it wasn't frantic. It was heavy and steady, like something old, waking up. The third kid spun back around, embarrassed now, and came at him again. The man didn't wait this time. He stepped in close, too close for the kid to swing properly, and shoved him hard in the chest. The kid hit the brick wall with a dull thud and slid down a little, catching himself. It wasn't a knockout, but it changed the room. The alley mouth seemed to pull them inward like gravity. The talking one's grin was gone now. "You put hands on him?" he said. The man's voice stayed calm. "He came at me." The quiet one took a slow step forward. "You should have just apologized," he said. The man looked at him. "You should have just walked away." The quiet one's face tightened. Then he nodded once, almost like he'd accepted something. And he moved. Not lunging like the third one. Controlled. He reached for the man's jacket collar with one hand, trying to pull him forward, trying to drag him into the alley. The man caught the wrist mid-grab. For a moment they were locked, close enough to smell each other. The quiet one's breath smelled like cigarettes. The man felt the strength in his grip. Not a kid's strength. Not sloppy. This one had been in fights. The quiet one tried to twist free. The man didn't let him. He stepped in and drove his forearm into the guy's upper chest. Not punching, not swinging. A compact, brutal shove that stole air. The quiet one stumbled back, coughing once, eyes flashing with surprise. The talking one moved at the same time. The man saw him coming from the side. He ducked instinctively and felt the rush of air as something flew past his head. A fist. Close enough that he felt it graze his ear. The man turned and grabbed the talking one by the sleeve and yanked him forward. Hard. The talking one lost his footing. The man used the momentum and slammed him into the wall. Not a head smash. Not that. Just a hard collision that knocked the breath out of him. The talking one's back hit brick and his face changed instantly. Pain. Shock. Then rage. "You think you can do that?" he hissed. The man let go of his sleeve. He didn't want to keep touching them. Didn't want this to become something worse than it already was. He stepped back, palms open. "Stop," he said. The word came out like a command. For a second, all three of them hesitated. They weren't used to someone fighting back without panic. They weren't used to someone not shouting. The quiet one wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You got training?" he asked, voice low. The man didn't answer. The talking one spat onto the pavement. "You old," he muttered. "You think you tough because you got a kid." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not tough," he said. "I'm tired." That made the talking one blink, like it wasn't the response he expected. Then the talking one's hand slipped into his jacket pocket. The man's body went cold. He didn't move, but every part of him sharpened. The quiet one noticed too. "Don't," he warned his friend. The talking one ignored him. His hand came out holding something small and metallic. A knife. Not big, not dramatic. A cheap folding blade. The kind sold at gas stations. The kind kids bought because it made them feel like men. The blade caught the streetlight. The man felt his mouth go dry. This was no longer a scuffle. This was a different line. He held his hands up slightly. "Put it away," he said. The talking one smiled again, but it was wrong now. "You scared now?" The man didn't answer. Because he was. Not for himself, for what he might do if that knife came closer. For what it would mean if he hurt this kid badly enough that the police had to take statements. For what his son would hear later, for what his son would see on the news. The quiet one stepped in front of the talking one slightly. "Bro, chill," he muttered. The talking one shoved him aside. "Nah," he said. "He wants to play." The man's voice stayed low. "This isn't a game." The talking one took one step closer, knife down at his side, casual, like he wasn't holding anything. That was the worst part, the casualness. The way he acted like this was normal. The man's mind started moving fast again. Distance. Angle. Where to grab. How to disarm. How to keep the blade away from his stomach. He hated that he knew these things. The talking one stepped closer again. The man saw his opening. He moved. Fast. Not backward. Forward. He grabbed the wrist holding the knife and slammed it upward into the wall, hard enough that the blade clattered loose. The knife hit the pavement and skidded a few inches. The talking one cursed. The man drove his shoulder into him and pinned him for a second, using weight and leverage, not fists. The quiet one lunged to grab the knife. The man saw it. He kicked it away with the side of his foot, sending it scraping deeper into the alley where none of them could reach it easily. The quiet one froze, eyes flicking toward where it landed. The third kid scrambled up from the wall and rushed forward again, but the man turned sharply and shoved him back with one arm. The third kid hit the dumpster and cried out. Now the talking one was struggling, trying to get free. The man held him against the wall, forearm pressed across his chest, not choking, but close. Enough, the man said. The talking one's face was red. You think you won? He rasped. The man leaned in slightly. I think you're stupid, he said quietly. That made the talking one's eyes widen, not because of the insult, because of how calm it was. The quiet one stood still now, breathing hard. He looked at the man with something new. Not fear exactly. Respect. Or at least caution. A siren sounded in the distance, closer this time. The man's head turned slightly. He hadn't called anyone. Neither had they. Someone else had. A neighbor. A passerby. Someone who finally decided this wasn't normal. The siren grew louder. The talking one struggled changed. He stopped fighting to escape and started looking past the man listening. The quiet one muttered, "Police." The third kid's face drained of color. The man released the talking one immediately and stepped back. The talking one stumbled forward, catching himself. For a moment, all four of them stood in silence, listening to the siren closing in. Then the talking one pointed at the man. "You did this," he said, voice sharp. The man didn't answer. The talking one backed away, eyes darting. The quiet one grabbed his friend's sleeve. "Come on." They started moving down the alley. The man watched them go. He didn't chase. He didn't want to. He just wanted it to end. But before they disappeared, the talking one turned back one last time. His face was twisted now, ugly with humiliation. "This ain't over," he said. The man's expression didn't change. But something inside him tightened, because he knew that wasn't a threat made for drama. It was a promise. The siren was close enough now that the red and blue lights began to flicker against the brick walls. The man stepped out of the alley mouth and into the open street. His hands were still up, palms visible. He heard the patrol car brake hard. A door slammed. "Hey!" a voice shouted. "Hands where I can see them!" The man froze. He turned slowly. Two officers, one male, one female, both tense, hands near their belts. The woman officer's eyes flicked over him quickly, scanning for a weapon. The man spoke carefully. "I'm not armed." "Get on the ground," the male officer ordered. The man hesitated for half a second, not because he wanted to resist, because he pictured his son's face. If someone saw him like this, if it got out, if his son heard about it at school. He lowered himself slowly, knees first, then palms on the cold pavement. The street smelled like wet concrete and old trash. He could hear his own breathing. The female officer moved closer, voice firm. "Stay still." He stayed still. A knee pressed lightly into his back. Hands grabbed his wrists and pulled them behind him. Cold metal clicked shut. Handcuffs. The sound was sharp. Final. He closed his eyes briefly. He didn't fight. He didn't plead. He just lay there and listened to the officer's radios crackle. A voice said something about 3 suspects fleeing. The male officer cursed under his breath. The female officer asked, "You know them?" The man shook his head slightly. "No." "Why were you fighting them?" The man swallowed. "I wasn't trying to fight," he said. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. The male officer snorted. Sure looked like it. The man didn't respond. He stared at the pavement. He could still feel the echo of the knife in his hand, the weight of that moment when it could have gone wrong by inches. The female officer's voice softened just a fraction. Did they pull a weapon? The man nodded once. Yes. Where is it? In the alley? I kicked it away. The officers exchanged a look. The male officer stood and moved toward the alley entrance. The female officer stayed behind him, still watching. Who called? She asked. The man didn't know. He said nothing. The siren noise had died down now. The patrol car idled behind them. The street had gone quiet again. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of attention. People were watching from windows, from doorways, from behind curtains. The man could feel their eyes without seeing them. He lay there in handcuffs, face turned slightly toward the curb. And he realized something that made his stomach sink. He had walked into this to protect a stranger, and now, in front of everyone, he looked like the threat. They pulled him up by his arms. Not gently, but not cruel either. Just procedure. The cuffs stayed on. The male officer came back from the alley holding the knife and a folded handkerchief. He looked at it, then at the man. You weren't lying, he said. It wasn't approval, just a fact. The female officer studied the man's face. You hurt? She asked. He shook his head. No. His ear throbbed where the punch had grazed him. His shoulder ached from the shove into the wall. But none of it felt important. What happened? She asked. He told it straight. No speeches. No extra detail. He kept his voice level. He described the phone calls, the demand to meet, the knife. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't minimize. The male officer listened with his jaw tight. You could have called us, he said. The man met his eyes. Would you have come? The officer didn't answer. Instead he asked, You got a record? There it was, the question that always came sooner or later. The man held the officer's gaze. No. That part was true. No record. Nothing written down. But there were things that didn't make it onto paper. The female officer studied him for another second, then nodded toward the patrol car. We'll need you to come in. Statement. They'll circle back around for those guys. The man's stomach tightened. How long? She shrugged slightly. Depends. He thought of his son asleep. Alone. He'd told the boy he'd come back. I have a kid at home, he said. He's by himself. Both officers paused. How old? The male officer asked. 8. The female officer's eyes changed. Why is he alone? Because they told me to come alone. Silence. The male officer swore under his breath. You got someone who can stay with him? The man shook his head. The female officer considered for a second. Then she stepped away and made a quick call on her radio. Low voice. Efficient. After a minute she came back. Patrol car will swing by your place. Check on him. We'll make this quick. The man nodded once. Thank you. They guided him into the back of the car. The door shut with a heavy click. He sat there, hands cuffed, staring through the metal grate at the front seats. The ride to the station felt longer than it was. He kept picturing his son waking up and walking into the living room, calling for him. Hearing no answer. The thought made his throat tighten. At the station, they removed the cuffs, but told him to stay seated in a small interview room. White walls. 1 table, 2 chairs. He sat, hands flat on the table, waiting. The adrenaline was gone now. What remained was something duller. He wasn't afraid of charges. He was afraid of time, of delay, of his son sitting alone with a patrol officer at the door, confused. The female officer came in first. She sat across from him. Tell me about the calls, she said. He repeated the details. She wrote notes. You threatened them, she asked. Yes. She didn't look up. What'd you say? If they touched my son, I'd kill them. She looked up then. Her expression didn't change much. Do you mean that? He held her gaze. Yes. She studied him for a long moment, not judging, measuring. You understand how that sounds, she said. I do. The male officer entered with a file in hand. Found them, he said. The man's pulse kicked once. Behind a warehouse 2 blocks down, one of them's got a bruised chest. Claims you attacked them. Of course you did. The man didn't speak. The male officer leaned against the wall. They say you jumped them. The man almost laughed. Almost. They pulled a knife, he said. We found it, the officer replied. But nobody's claiming it. Silence. The female officer tapped her pen lightly against the paper. There were witnesses, she said. The man looked at her. Couple people saw part of it from the street, she continued. Said you were holding one of them against a wall. He didn't deny it. I was. The male officer crossed his arms. Why didn't you just walk away yesterday? The question landed heavy. The man stared at the table for a second. Then he looked up. Because she couldn't. The room went quiet. The female officer's pen stopped tapping. The male officer shifted slightly. The man continued, voice steady. They were cornering her. She said stop. Nobody else did anything. The male officer's jaw tightened. You a vigilante now? He asked. The man shook his head. No. Then what are you? The question hung in the air. He didn't answer right away, because the honest answer wasn't simple. He was a father. He was a man who once walked away from something he shouldn't have. He was someone who didn't want his son growing up thinking silence was safe. I'm just someone who didn't want it to happen, he said finally. The female officer watched him closely. After a long pause, she closed her notebook. You're not under arrest, she said. The tension in his chest eased slightly. But, she added, this isn't done. If they press charges, we'll have to revisit it. They won't, he said quietly. The male officer snorted. You sure about that? The man met his eyes. They care more about how they look than paperwork. The officer studied him. Yeah, he muttered. You might be right. They stood. The female officer gestured toward the door. Let's get you home. As they walked out of the station, the night air felt colder than before. He didn't ask if they'd arrest the 3 men. He already knew. At his apartment building, the patrol car was parked outside. His heart pounded as he stepped out. The female officer knocked on his door. A moment later, it opened. His son stood there, eyes wide. A uniformed officer stood just behind him in the hallway. The boy's face changed when he saw his father. He didn't run. He just stared. The man crouched immediately. I'm here, he said. The boy's lower lip trembled. Why were the police here? The man looked at the officer briefly, then back at his son. Because some people made a bad choice, he said softly. The boy swallowed. Did you get in trouble? The question cut deeper than anything else that night. The man shook his head. No. The boy studied him carefully. You promised you'd come back. The man nodded. I know. The boy stepped forward then and wrapped his arms around him. Hard. The man held him just as tight. Over the boy's shoulder, he saw the female officer watching. Not suspicious now, just thoughtful. After the officers left, the apartment felt smaller. The boy didn't go back to bed right away. He sat on the couch beside his father, close enough that their shoulders touched. Are they going to come here? The boy asked. The man hesitated. No, he said finally. The boy leaned into him slightly. Good. The man stared at the wall. He wasn't as certain as he sounded, because humiliation like that didn't disappear quietly. It waited, and the talking one's face in the alley, red, breathless, furious, stayed with him. This wasn't about the woman anymore. It wasn't about pride. It was about a line drawn, and lines don't fade easily. Later that night, after his son fell asleep again, the man stood at the window. He didn't move the curtain much, just enough. The street below looked empty, but he knew better now than to trust empty. He stood there for a long time, and for the first time since it started, he wondered whether stepping in had changed something inside him that wouldn't settle back down. He didn't sleep. Not really. He lay on top of the covers with one arm over his eyes, listening to the building breathe. Pipes ticking. A neighbor coughing. The elevator grinding somewhere below. Every small sound felt like a question. Around 3 in the morning, he got up and walked into his son's room. The boy was curled on his side, one hand tucked under his cheek. Mouth slightly open, breathing slow. The man stood in the doorway for a while. He tried to imagine explaining tonight to him in 10 years. Tried to imagine saying, "I handled it perfectly." He couldn't, because perfect wasn't what this was. He went back to the living room and sat in the dark until the sky lightened again. When morning came, he moved slower. His body felt used. Not injured, just worn. His shoulder protested when he lifted the kettle. His knuckles were scraped lightly, thin red lines across skin. His son noticed. "You got hurt," the boy said, staring at his hand. "It's nothing." The boy reached out and touched one of the scrapes gently. "You said you weren't going to be mad." "I wasn't." The boy's eyes searched his face like he was trying to catch a lie. "You looked mad," he said quietly. The man didn't argue. He poured cereal instead of making eggs. Didn't trust his focus. As they walked to school, the street felt different. He couldn't explain how. Same buildings, same cracked sidewalks, same traffic lights. But now every face registered. Every parked car. Every man leaning against a wall. He didn't see the 3 of them. Not near the school. Not at the corner store. That almost made it worse. Silence can mean retreat. Or it can mean planning. At the school gate, his son held his hand longer than usual before letting go. "You'll be here after?" the boy asked. "Yes." "Promise?" "I promise." The boy nodded and went inside. The man didn't leave immediately. He stood across the street, arms folded loosely, pretending to check his phone while his eyes scanned everything. Nothing. He went home and tried to sit still. He couldn't. He cleaned the kitchen twice. He rearranged the books on the shelf. He checked the locks again. At noon, there was a knock on the door. 3 sharp raps. His heart kicked hard. He moved to the door silently and looked through the people. A woman stood in the hallway. Mid-20s. Brown coat. Dark hair pulled back. It took him a second. Then he recognized her. The woman from the street. He opened the door halfway. She looked smaller here, less guarded. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't know where else to go." He opened the door wider. "How did you find me?" She hesitated. "I asked at the store. The owner said he'd seen you around." Of course he had. The man stepped aside slightly. "Come in." She walked in carefully like she didn't want to leave footprints. "I heard what happened," she said. "How?" "One of the guys posted something online. Said you jumped them." The man closed the door slowly. "Figures." She swallowed. "They're saying you pulled a knife." He let out a slow breath. "That's not what happened." "I know." She looked at him directly. "I told the police." He blinked. "You talked to them?" She nodded. "They came to my job this morning, asked questions." His chest tightened. "What did you say?" "The truth." Silence stretched between them. She looked around the apartment briefly. "You have a son," she said softly. "Yes." Her jaw tightened slightly. "This is my fault." He shook his head. "No. If I hadn't." He cut her off gently. "You didn't ask for it." She looked like she might argue. Then she didn't. Instead, she said, "They won't stop." The words were calm, not dramatic, just certain. He felt that old weight settle again. "You know them?" he asked. She hesitated. "One of them," she admitted, "the quiet one." He could see it in her face. "X?" he asked. She nodded once. "Why didn't you tell me that night?" "I didn't think it mattered," she said. "They were just trying to scare me." He stared at her. "They brought a knife." Her eyes flickered. "That wasn't his," she said quickly. "That was the loud one. He's the one who likes attention." The man ran a hand over his face. "So what is this?" he asked quietly. "Pride? Revenge?" She shook her head. It's control. The word landed heavy. They don't like being embarrassed, she continued, especially in public. He thought about the alley, the wall, the knife skidding away. He thought about the patrol car lights. "Do you think you made them look weak?" she said. He almost laughed. They were weak. She didn't smile. That's not how they see it. Silence. She shifted her weight. "They're going to push," she said. "They won't attack you straight on again. Not after last night. But they'll try something else." His stomach tightened. "Like what?" she hesitated. "Rumors. School stuff. Maybe follow you. Try to make you react first." He stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Because you stepped in." The words were simple. No emotion layered on top. Just fact. He looked away for a moment. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected her to disappear, to move on. Instead, she was standing in his kitchen, telling him the fight had only shifted shape. "They posted a video," she added quietly. His head snapped back toward her. "What video?" "From the alley. Part of it." His chest felt tight. "What part?" "You holding him against the wall." He closed his eyes briefly. "Of course. Phones. Always phones. Where?" "Social media. It's spreading locally." He imagined his son's classmates' parents scrolling. Imagined someone recognizing him. Imagined the narrative twisting. He opened his eyes again. "Do they show the knife?" She shook her head. "No." He let out a breath through his nose. "Then it looks like I jumped them." "Yes." The word hung in the room. He felt anger rise, but it wasn't loud. It was tired. He'd known this part was coming. The woman watched him carefully. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and looked out. The street below looked harmless, but now it felt like a stage. Anything could be filmed, edited, shared. He thought about going to the police again, about filing something official. But that meant paperwork, statements, more attention. He thought about ignoring it, letting it burn out. But humiliation doesn't burn out when it has fuel, and they had fuel now. He turned back to her. "I'm not escalating," he said. She nodded slowly. "They want you angry," she said. "They want you loud." He almost smiled. "They don't know me very well." She studied him. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think they do." There was a knock at the door. Both of them froze. 3 quick raps. The man's body went still instantly. He moved toward the door slowly, looked through the peephole. An older man stood there. Gray hair. Building superintendent. He opened the door slightly. "Everything okay?" the superintendent asked. The man nodded. "Yeah." The older man hesitated. "Couple tenants said police were here last night." Of course they had. The man kept his voice calm, misunderstanding. The superintendent studied him for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right." He walked away. The man closed the door. He leaned his forehead against it briefly. The woman stood quietly in the middle of the room. "It's already spreading," she said. He knew. He could feel it. The story was moving without him. And the worst part wasn't the police. It wasn't the 3 young men. It was the idea that his son might hear a version of this before he heard his. He pushed off the door. "I need to pick him up in a few hours," he said. She nodded. "Be careful," she replied. He almost laughed again. "I always am." But the truth sat heavier now. Because being careful hadn't kept this small. It had just changed its shape. And as the afternoon light shifted across the walls, he understood something he hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't going to end with one fight. It was going to end with a choice. Not about violence, about what he was willing to carry in front of his son. By the time he reached the school that afternoon, the air felt thick. Not physically, just socially. A few parents were gathered near the gate, talking in small clusters. Phones in hand, glances that lingered half a second too long. He recognized that look. Recognition without context. He kept his face neutral. His son came running out with the other kids, laughing at something, backpack bouncing against his spine. The man felt his chest loosen for a brief second. Then one of the other boys slowed down near his son and said something low. The man couldn't hear it, but he saw his son's smile fade. The boy glanced over at him, not confused, embarrassed. The man's stomach dropped. He crouched as his son approached. "Hey," he said softly. The boy didn't hug him this time. He just stood there. "Someone said you were on a video," the boy said. The words were careful, like he was stepping over something sharp. The man felt heat rise behind his eyes. "What did they say?" he asked. "That you were fighting teenagers." The boy swallowed. "Is that true?" The man held his gaze. "Yes." The boy's face tightened. "Why?" The man looked around. Other parents were pretending not to watch. He stood up slowly. "Let's walk," he said. They moved away from the gate. Halfway down the block, his son spoke again. "Did you start it?" The question was small, but it carried weight. "No," the man said. "Then why does it look like that?" He stopped walking. He crouched in front of his son again, right there on the sidewalk. Cars passed behind them. He didn't care, because sometimes, he said carefully, people only show the part that makes them look better. The boy's eyebrows pulled together. "They didn't show the knife?" he asked. The man's breath caught. "How do you know about that?" "Ethan said there was a knife, but nobody saw it." The man nodded slowly. "There was a knife." The boy's face went pale. "Did they try to hurt you?" "Yes." "Did you hurt them?" The man paused. "I stopped them." The boy looked down at his shoes. After a long moment, he asked, "Are you in trouble?" The man shook his head. "No." "Are you going to get in trouble?" "I don't think so." The boy nodded slowly. Then he looked up again. "Are you a bad guy?" The question hit deeper than anything else had. The man felt something twist inside his chest. He placed both hands gently on his son's shoulders. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not." The boy searched his face like he was trying to confirm it for himself. Then he asked the one question the man hadn't prepared for. "Were you trying to be brave?" The man didn't answer right away, because brave wasn't what it felt like. It had felt heavy, necessary, regretful. "I was trying to do what I thought was right," he said finally. The boy nodded once. That answer seemed to settle something in him. They walked home. Inside the apartment, the silence felt different again. Not tense. Reflective. The boy sat at the table without being asked and pulled out his homework. The man stood by the window, phone in his hand. He'd looked at the video earlier. He shouldn't have. But he did. It was short, 12 seconds. Just enough to show him pinning the talking one against the wall. No context. No knife. No shove from them first. Just him, calm, controlled, dangerous looking. The comments were predictable. Some called him a hero. Some called him unstable. Some said he'd snapped. None of them knew him. That wasn't the part that hurt. The part that hurt was imagining his son's teacher seeing it. Imagining other parents deciding quietly that maybe their kids shouldn't come over anymore. He locked the phone and set it down. His son looked up. "Are you going to fight them again?" "No." "What if they come back?" The man walked over and sat across from him. "If they come back," he said slowly, "I'll handle it differently." The boy tilted his head. "How?" The man thought about it. He thought about the alley, about the knife, about the red and blue lights, about lying on the pavement in handcuffs, about his son standing in the doorway. "I won't meet them alone again," he said. The boy nodded. "That's good." Silence settled between them. After a minute, the boy asked softly, "Why didn't other people help that lady?" The man leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked at his son's small hands resting on the table. "Because it's easier not to. Because they were scared. Because they thought someone else would." He didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, "Sometimes people hope someone else will step in." The boy frowned. "Did you hope that?" The man swallowed. "Yes. And nobody did." He shook his head. The boy thought for a long moment. Then he said something that made the man's chest tighten. "I'm glad you did." The words were simple, not dramatic, not loud, just honest. The man looked down at the table for a second because he couldn't look at his son right away. He hadn't stepped in to be admired. He hadn't stepped in to teach a lesson. He'd stepped in because the sound of her saying stop and no one listening had felt like something breaking. He looked back up. "You know something?" he said quietly. "What?" "It's not about being the only one who steps in." The boy blinked. "It's about making sure you don't pretend you didn't see." The boy nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand, but he would. Later that evening, there was another knock at the door. The man stiffened automatically. He looked through the people. 2 officers, different ones this time. He opened the door. "Evening," one of them said. "Just following up." The man stepped aside. His son watched from the couch, eyes wide but steady. "We picked up one of the guys," the officer said. The man's pulse shifted. "Which one?" "The one with the knife. The talking one." "He's got priors," the officer added. "Nothing major, but enough." The man nodded. "They're claiming self-defense," the second officer said. "Of course they were. But," the first officer continued, "we've got the witness statement from the woman. And the knife. And the call logs." The man stayed silent. "We're not charging you," the officer said finally. "Looks like you were defending yourself." The tension in the room loosened slightly. "However," the officer added, "this kind of thing escalates fast. You understand?" "Yes." The officer glanced at the boy. "You're lucky your dad kept his head," he said gently. The boy looked at his father, proud. The officers left a few minutes later. The apartment felt quiet again, but not fragile. Different. The man sat down on the couch beside his son. "Are they going to jail?" the boy asked. "I don't know. Are you glad?" The man thought about it. He pictured the talking one's face in the alley. Young, angry, not evil, just reckless. "I'm glad it didn't get worse," he said. The boy leaned against him. After a long moment he asked, "Would you do it again?" The man closed his eyes briefly. He felt the weight of the questions settle deep inside him. Would he step in again? Would he risk the noise, the handcuffs, the video, the doubt in his son's eyes? He opened his eyes. "Yes," he said, not because it felt heroic, not because it felt good, but because he knew what it felt like to live with the opposite choice. And that was heavier. The boy nodded once. Then he rested his head against his father's arm. The room stayed quiet. Outside, the street carried on. Cars passed. Someone laughed somewhere down the block. Life didn't stop. It never had. Later that night, when his son was asleep again, the man stood by the window one more time. He didn't feel watched now. He didn't feel hunted. He felt something else. Changed. Not harder. Not softer. Not softer. Just clearer. He understood something he hadn't before. The street hadn't gone silent because he was strong. It had gone silent because most people were waiting for someone else, and the cost of not moving had become heavier than the cost of stepping in. He still didn't like what it had stirred up in him. The old reflexes, the quick calculations, the part of him that could hurt someone without hesitation if it meant protecting his child. He didn't want his son to inherit that part, but he did want him to inherit the other thing, the refusal to look away. He turned from the window and walked down the hallway. He paused at his son's door, listened to the steady breathing inside. Then he went to bed. He didn't know if the story would follow them in small ways. Rumors fade slowly. But he knew this. When his son asked one day why he stepped in, he wouldn't have to invent an answer. He would just tell the truth. She said, "Stop." and nobody listened. So he did. The next morning, his son woke up before the alarm. The man knew because he heard the soft shuffle of socks on the hallway floor, then the faint creak of the couch as the boy climbed onto it. He didn't open his eyes right away. He stayed still, listening. The apartment was quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet from earlier nights, just morning quiet. A child awake too early, trying to exist without being loud. He finally opened his eyes and looked over. His son was sitting with his knees tucked up, staring at the blank television screen like it might turn on by itself. "You okay?" the man asked. The boy jumped slightly. Not scared, just surprised to be caught. He nodded. Then he nodded again, slower, like the second one meant more. The man sat up and rubbed his face. "You hungry?" The boy shrugged. That shrug didn't match him. Usually, breakfast was the first thing he asked about. Pancakes, toast, cereal, debates that mattered more to him than they should. The man stood and walked into the kitchen. He didn't ask again. He just started moving, filling the kettle, pulling bread from the cabinet. Behind him, he heard the boy slide off the couch and follow. The boy stood in the doorway and watched him. "You're not going to jail?" the boy asked. The man froze for half a second, hand still on the loaf of bread. He didn't turn around immediately. "No," he said. The boy stayed quiet. The man turned then. The boy's face was serious, older than it should have been. "Ethan said his dad said you might," the boy murmured. The man felt his jaw tighten, not in anger, but in something closer to exhaustion. He walked back over and crouched down. "Listen," he said. "People say things when they don't know the full story." The boy's eyes stayed fixed on his. "But they saw the video," the boy replied. The man nodded slowly. "Yes, they saw part of it." The boy looked down. "I don't like them seeing you." The words came out small, almost embarrassed. The man swallowed. He understood what the boy meant, not just that strangers were watching, that his father was being looked at like a stranger, like something questionable. He put a hand gently on his son's shoulder. "I don't like it either," he admitted. The boy's eyes flicked up. "But we can't control that," the man added. "All we can control is what we know is true." The boy's shoulders loosened slightly. He didn't smile, but the tension eased a little. The man stood and finished making toast. They ate quietly at the table. The boy chewed slowly, staring at his plate like it had answers on it. After a while, he asked, "Why did you say you would kill them?" The man's throat tightened. He hadn't expected that question so soon. He looked at his son. The boy's voice was calm. No accusation, just curiosity, honest confusion. The man took a slow breath. "I said that because I was scared," he said. The boy frowned. "But you said you weren't scared." The man nodded once. "I lied." The boy stared at him. The word lied landed heavy between them. Children don't hear their parents admit that often. The man's voice stayed low. "I wasn't scared of them," he explained. "I was scared of losing you." The boy's eyes widened slightly. The man could see the boy trying to understand the difference. "So you can say anything when you're scared?" the boy asked. The man paused. He thought carefully before answering. "No," he said. "But sometimes, when you love someone, fear makes your mouth faster than your brain." The boy blinked, absorbing it. Then he nodded once, like that made sense in a way only children can accept. They walked to school again. The man noticed the way his son held his hand tighter than usual, fingers locked like he didn't want to let go too early. At the school gate, a few parents were there again. The same glances, the same quiet watching. But now, it was different. Because the man didn't feel defensive. He felt aware. He wasn't there to be liked. He was there to drop his son off safely. His son paused before going in. He looked up. "Are you going to pick me up today?" he asked. The man nodded. "Yes." The boy hesitated. "Are they going to come again?" The man's answer came out without hesitation. "No." He didn't know if it was true. But the boy needed to hear it. The boy nodded and walked inside. The man stayed outside for a moment longer, staring at the doors. Then he turned and walked away. On the way back home, his phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Just 3 words. W-E. See you. The man stopped walking. He stared at the screen. His fingers went cold. He didn't reply. He didn't block it. He just stared until the letters started to feel unreal, like they were floating. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. When he got home, he didn't sit down. He didn't pace either. He stood in the middle of the living room and looked around like he was seeing the apartment for the first time. The couch, the kitchen table, his son's shoes near the door, the framed photo on the shelf from last year's school picture day, his son smiling with missing teeth. The man's chest tightened. He walked into the bedroom closet and pulled out an old bag. He hadn't touched it in years. It wasn't hidden for dramatic reasons. It was hidden because he didn't want reminders. The zipper stuck for a second. He tugged harder. It opened. Inside were things folded carefully, not because they were precious, but because he'd wanted them contained. A flashlight, a small first aid kit, a phone charger, a thin pair of gloves, a folded piece of paper with a number written on it. He stared at the bag for a long moment. Then he closed it again. Not because he didn't need it. Because he hated that he might. He set it back on the closet shelf. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. He could call the police. He could show them the message. But he already knew what they'd say. If they come near your son again, call us. And he would. But waiting for the next step felt like waiting for a door to open while your child stood behind you. He rubbed his palms together slowly. He tried to think like a father, but another part of him was thinking too. The part that remembered the old rules. People like that didn't stop because they felt bad. They stopped when it became inconvenient, when it became risky, when the cost outweighed the thrill. He hated that he knew that. At noon, his phone rang again. Not the unknown number. A different one, the female officer from the night before. He answered quickly. Hello? We got a formal statement from the woman, she said. It's solid. The man exhaled slowly. Okay. And, she continued, one of them admitted they called you. The man's throat tightened. Which one? The quiet one. That surprised him. The man sat up straighter. What did he say? He said it was a joke. He said they didn't think you'd show. The man almost laughed, but it didn't come out. Do you believe that? He asked. There was a pause. No, the officer replied. The man's grip tightened on the phone. They're still contacting me, he said. Any threats? He hesitated. Then, yes. Save everything, she said. If they text again, don't respond. I won't. Another pause. Her voice softened slightly. You did the right thing. The man didn't answer. He didn't know how to respond to that anymore, because right things had consequences. After the call ended, he sat in silence. The clock ticked loudly in the kitchen. When it was time to pick his son up, he left early. He stood near the school gate again, watching the crowd. This time he didn't care if people looked at him. Let them look. He wanted to be visible. His son came out and walked straight to him, not running. He looked up. They're still talking, the boy said quietly. The man nodded. I know. The boy hesitated. Then he asked, do you feel bad? The man looked at him. About what? About hurting them. The man took a slow breath. He stared at the children pouring out of the building like water. He thought about the knife. He thought about the text message. He thought about his son's question from yesterday. Are you a bad guy? I don't feel bad that I stopped them, he said. The boy nodded. But, the boy pressed. The man swallowed. I feel bad that it had to happen in front of you, he admitted. The boy looked down. Then he said something small, almost like he didn't want to say it. I was scared. The man's chest tightened. He stopped walking and crouched. He put both hands on the boy's shoulders. "I know," he said softly. "I'm sorry." The boy blinked hard. "But you still did it," the boy whispered. The man nodded. "Yes." The boy's voice shook slightly. "I don't want you to get hurt." The man pulled him into a hug right there on the sidewalk. He didn't care who saw. "I won't," he said. He didn't know if it was true, but he said it anyway. They walked home slowly. When they reached their building, the man noticed a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. Dark sedan, windows tinted, engine off, someone inside. He didn't stare too long. He didn't want to show fear, but he remembered the message. "We see you." He held his son's hand tighter and walked inside, up the stairs, into the apartment. He locked the door. Then he locked it again. His son went to the couch and turned on cartoons like nothing had happened. The man stood by the window and watched the street below through a narrow gap in the curtain. The sedan stayed there. 10 minutes. Then 15. His jaw clenched. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This time it was a picture. A photo of his son. Taken from across the street at school. The boy walking beside him. The man felt his entire body go cold. His vision narrowed. He didn't breathe for a second. Then his lungs filled sharply, like they'd remembered their job too late. His hands shook. Not from fear, from rage that didn't have anywhere to go. He stared at the picture until the screen dimmed. Then he looked down the street again. The sedan was still there, and for the first time since this started, he understood something clearly. They weren't trying to scare him anymore. They were trying to break him. He turned away from the window and walked down the hallway to his son's room. He stood in the doorway. His son was sitting on the floor, building something with blocks, tongue slightly out in concentration. The man watched him. The boy looked up and smiled. "Look," he said proudly, holding up a crooked tower. The man nodded. "That's good," he said. His voice sounded normal. It didn't match what was happening inside him. He stepped into the room and sat down on the carpet. He picked up a block and added it to the tower. His hands were steady again. He didn't know yet what he was going to do. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let his son grow up learning that fear decides what kind of man you become. He would carry the weight. He would carry the weight. He would carry the risk. He would carry the blame if he had to. But he wasn't going to carry silence. Not anymore. A week passed without anything loud happening. No calls, no texts, no shadows outside the building that stayed too long. Silence should have felt like relief. It didn't. He found himself waking before the alarm every morning, not with panic, just alert, eyes open, listening. The building had its own rhythm at dawn. Pipes ticking, someone's shower running 2 floors down, a door closing gently. Normal sounds. He catalogued them without meaning to. He walked to the window out of habit now. 2 fingers pulling the curtain just enough to see the street. Parked cars. Delivery van. A woman jogging past with headphones in. Nothing unusual. He let the curtain fall. In the kitchen, he stood still for a moment before starting the coffee. His reflection in the dark microwave door looked older than it had a month ago. Not dramatically, just a thin layer of something settled over him. Awareness, maybe. His son shuffled out of the bedroom, hair uneven, eyes half closed. "You're up," the boy mumbled. "Yeah." The boy climbed onto a chair at the table and rested his chin in his hands. Did they text again? The question came casually, like he was asking about homework. "No," he said. The boy nodded once. He seemed to accept that. Then he asked, "If they do, will you tell me?" He hesitated. "Yes." The boy studied him for a second, then seemed satisfied. "Okay." They ate in quiet. Not tense quiet, just thoughtful. At school, the stares had softened but not disappeared. People still recognized him. A few parents gave tight smiles. One man avoided eye contact entirely. He didn't resent them. He understood distance. People liked safety, neat and predictable. They didn't like being reminded that something ugly could unfold 10 feet away while everyone watched. As he turned to leave the gate, he heard his name. He hadn't expected that. It was the woman. She stood near the sidewalk, hands tucked into her coat pockets. She looked steadier now. Not fragile, just tired. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes. You?" She nodded. "They charged him," she said quietly. He didn't ask which one. "Not for much," she added. "But enough." He let that settle. She looked at him carefully. "I'm sorry it spilled into your life." "It was already there," he said before thinking. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He searched for the right way to say it. "There are moments," he said slowly, "that follow you even if you walk away. I've had one before." She didn't press. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Then she said, "Thank you." Not dramatic, not heavy, just clear. He nodded once. After she left, he stood there a little longer than necessary. He realized something small but important. He didn't feel anger when he thought about them anymore. He felt watchful. That was different. A few days later, the message came again. Not threatening. Just 3 words. "You still careful?" He stared at it. It wasn't the loud kind of menace. It was softer. Testing. He didn't respond. He saved it. Then he set the phone face down and went into his son's room. The boy was building something out of blocks again. A long wall this time. "What's that?" he asked. "A barrier," the boy said. "From what?" The boy shrugged. "Just in case." He sat down on the floor beside him. "You can't build walls everywhere," he said gently. The boy looked up. "Why not?" He thought about it. "Because then you don't see anything else." The boy stared at the half-built wall. Then he slowly removed 2 blocks from the middle. "A window," he said. He nodded. "That's better." That evening they walked to the grocery store together. He felt it again, that sense of being observed. He didn't whip his head around. He didn't tense visibly. He just adjusted slightly so his son was on the inside of the sidewalk. At the corner, he saw a familiar face across the street. The quiet one, standing alone. Hands in pockets. No smirk. No knife. Just watching. Their eyes met. The distance between them felt wider than the street. Neither moved. For a second, he considered crossing over, ending it with words, drawing a line clearly. But he didn't. Because this wasn't about proving anything. It was about control. The quiet one looked away first. Then he walked off. Just like that. No drama. No chase. The man exhaled slowly. His son tugged his hand. "Can we get ice cream too?" He looked down. "Yes." The boy grinned and skipped a little ahead. He followed at a normal pace. Inside, he felt something shift again. Not fear fading. Not victory. Just understanding. This wasn't a story that wrapped up neatly. There wouldn't be a final scene where everyone apologized or learned a clean lesson. There would be watchfulness. There would be small decisions. There would be moments when he chose not to react. And moments when he would. That was the real aftermath. That night, his son lay in bed staring at the ceiling. "Daddy." "Yeah." "Were you different before that day?" The question surprised him. "Yes," he said. "How?" He sat on the edge of the bed. "I used to think staying out of things kept us safe." The boy turned his head. "And now?" He took a breath. "Now I think pretending not to see can be its own kind of danger." The boy was quiet. "Are you scared all the time?" he asked. He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I'm careful." The boy seemed to like that answer better. After a moment he asked, "If it happens again, will you still step in?" He didn't answer immediately. He pictured the street, the woman, the knife, the handcuffs, the video, the messages. He pictured his son watching from a bench. "Yes," he said. The boy nodded slowly. "Okay." He stood to leave. As he reached the door, the boy said softly, "I'm glad you hurt her." He paused. "Me too," he said. Later, standing at the window, he realized something had changed in him that wouldn't go back. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for fights, but he was no longer the kind of man who could walk past a moment and convince himself it wasn't his responsibility. That awareness didn't feel heroic. It felt heavy. But it felt honest. The street below looked ordinary. A car drove by. Someone laughed somewhere out of sight. Life continued without acknowledging what had happened there. He understood now that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's waiting, and sometimes it's a choice. He turned off the light and stepped away from the window. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel broken. He felt changed. And for the first time since it began, that change didn't scare him. Because his son had seen him stand still when it mattered. And maybe one day, when someone else said stop and no one listened, his son would.